Welcome everyone to the Champaign County Master Gardener's Native Plants for Shade Garden program this evening. I'd like to introduce you to our speaker. Her name is Erin Garrett. She is Energy and Environmental Stewardship Extension Educator for the southernmost 5 counties in Illinois. She's part of the Illinois Extension Smart Grid Outreach Team. She serves as local coordinator for the Master Gardeners and Master Naturalists. She has a master's in plant biology, a bachelor's in environmental studies. She also serves as a board member for the Southern chapter of the Illinois Native Plant Society. And Erin, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for that introduction. I'm going to turn my video on just for a second, just to say hello to all of you. I know sometimes I like to see the person who's talking to me, at least for a second. So hello, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Tonight we're going to be talking all about shade gardens and native plants for our shade gardens. And one of the reasons why I developed this presentation is because oftentimes when we talk about native plants, we focus on full sun pollinator gardens. But that doesn't mean that there's not a place for those native plants in your shade garden. And a lot of the times we struggle to find the plants that will do well in a shade garden. So kind of composed all that information together, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to turn my video off so I'm not blocking the pictures on the screen, and we'll get started. So to give you an outline of what we're going to talk about today, we'll start by focusing on the ecological role that our gardens can play. Move into talking about why we want to choose native plants, and specifically why do we want to put natives in our shade gardens. We'll talk a little bit about when to buy native plants, where and how, and then the bulk of the time we'll spend looking at different species that you can consider adding into your garden. So we'll go through a lot of different examples of plants that you might want to add to a shade garden. And then we'll close with an example of a design, and we'll use my shade garden in my backyard as an example of just thinking through, how do you go through all of these plants that we're talking about and choose ones to put into your landscape. So we'll begin with a quote from Dr. Doug Tallamy. Hopefully a lot of you are familiar with that name. And he strives to empower ordinary people like you and I to make a difference in our environment. So I like this quote from him. He says, "It is now within the power of individual gardeners to do something that we all dream of doing, to make a difference." And when we talk about making a difference today, we're talking about changing our home landscapes to better support the ecology of our native ecosystems. Okay, so if we back up a little bit and start by thinking about the role that gardens play for us as humans. Okay, this is of course not a comprehensive list, but it includes some of the common reasons that we create and maintain gardens in our home landscapes. They're beautiful, right? We like to see and view the aesthetic beauty. They make us feel like we have a sense of place in our homes. For many of us, they are an outlet for our creativity. They allow us to experiment with adding different textures and colors and flowers, and experiment with design as well. It's a hobby, of course, for many of us. And then some of us also, put in gardens to provide food for our families. If we look at the ecological role of our gardens, okay, our gardens don't exist outside of the realm of nature, but they're part of the larger scheme of nature that surrounds us, okay? So whether we want them to or not, our gardens are performing ecological roles, okay? So what does that mean? Well, here are some of the ways that they perform those roles. So gardens can provide habitat for insects, birds, and wildlife, right? So insects eat a lot of our leaves. Birds and wildlife will eat berries and seeds, okay? And then they'll, I'm talking about food. Habitat and then food is the next one, okay? So habitat is also, right? We find insects and birds living in our trees. We have raccoons come into our yards, squirrels, chipmunks. It's not a stale place, right? It's full of life, not just the plants. Okay, so we've got habitat, we then have food. And our gardens can also, depending on what plants you have, help aid in water filtration and potentially improve our soil as well. So these roles and functions come with having a garden, but the plants that we choose, where we put them, and how we manage our garden all impact the relative strength of that ecological role of our garden. So today we're talking about native plants, but not all native plants are equal. And it's important to remember that we don't need to have a 100% native plant garden to offer beneficial habitat and landscape. So in one of Doug Tallamy's latest books, he talked about the 30-70 ratio. So he said, if you get up to 70% native plants in your home landscape, which sounds like a big number, if you go over that 70%, the benefits that you get from going more native isn't really that significant. So what that says to me is I can still have 30% of my landscape in ornamentals and other beautiful, more traditional flowers that I'm used to having in my garden, and that's okay. Now that number may be very different for you. Mine is definitely not at 70% native yet. I'm probably at 5% native and increasing every year, right? But that's kind of an end goal to keep in mind. And just a reminder that we don't have to go 100%. And we're still going to be giving some benefits to our native wildlife and still making a difference. So just a little food for thought for you to think about. But we are talking about natives tonight, native plants. So why should we choose native plants? The main reason is that they make or break food webs. Okay, and that's because 90%, okay, 9 out of 10 of every insect larvae and plant-eating insects will only eat plants with which they co-evolve. Okay, so if we want to enjoy the thousands of species of native insects that we have to have the plants that they eat, right? If we don't have the plants that the insects eat, they won't be here. Okay, and you may say, well, why are we talking about insects? We're talking about plants today. But insects are really important and they do a lot of work. And they convert plants into a food source, which is themselves, that's much more easily digested by many animals, okay? As well as natives making or breaking food webs, native plants also provide habitat for native wildlife and food as well for not just insects, right? But for our other critters and birds that we have in our landscapes, okay? So one thing to keep in mind, as I said already, not all native plants are equal. Okay, so when it comes to choosing native plants that serve as host plants, okay, a host plant is a plant that caterpillar will use as its food source. Okay, so we usually talk about native plants in terms of being a host plant or a nectar source. Okay, the host plant provides the food for the larval stage, and the nectar source provides the nectar for the adult moth or butterfly, okay? If we talk about host plants, about 5% of our native plants in North America provide 75% of caterpillar food, okay? So that means there are specific plants that have a much bigger impact. So by learning about what those plants are and adding those to our landscape, we can potentially have a broader impact than choosing a bunch of other native plants that may not serve as a big food source. They're still important to add, but not necessarily for that food. When we break down different groups of plants, what we find is that woody plants, so trees and shrubs, are the ones that come out on top. They support the highest diversity of caterpillars, the highest number of caterpillars. Okay? To give you an example, the one that reigns supreme is the oak tree. So oak trees, there's many different species of them. In Illinois and across the country. Across the country, they can support up to 900 different species of caterpillars. Okay, that's a huge, huge, huge number. We have about between 11,000 and 12,000 different species of butterflies and moths across the country. Okay, so that's getting close to like 10% of all of the caterpillar species that you could find in oak trees, right? Other top caterpillar producers are native cherries, birch, cottonwood, maples, and hickories. Okay, so those trees are some of the ones that produce the most caterpillars. Okay, when we talk about herbaceous plants, okay, so non-woody plants, many of the species that support a high number of caterpillars, they grow in full sun. Okay, so some examples are goldenrods and our sunflowers, or lead plant and related species, and Joe Pyeweed, just to give you some examples of our top performers. Okay, they can support between 30 and 112 different caterpillar species. Okay, so much less than the 900 of the oak, but that one was a really high example. So where does that leave herbaceous plants that grow in the shade? They're not woody and they're not growing in the sun. Okay, shade gardens still have a role. So these shade-tolerant herbaceous native plants, while they may not support high numbers of insects, they can provide an important habitat that we call a soft landing. Okay, soft landings are the next step in our native plant landscaping. And what is a soft landing? It's a newer term I've just heard in the last few months. And essentially, it describes the habitat below a tree. Okay. And the reason why we want to have soft landings is because trees produce a lot of caterpillars. We just learned that, right? Well, many of the caterpillars are eaten by birds and other wildlife. Others, of course, will go on to complete their life cycle to become adult butterflies and moths. We need that to happen so we can have the next generation, right? But where do moths and butterflies pupate? Many of them will drop from trees into the leaf litter below. Others blend into dried up leaves as camouflage, okay? So if we plant trees, but we don't have the proper habitat beneath them for those caterpillars, we haven't provided the full picture, the full landscape that they need. Okay, many of us have lawn underneath or try to grow lawn underneath our trees. Leaves fall, right? This is the time of year that we're raking up leaves, or we're mowing over our leaves and mulching them. That no longer is a safe habitat for those caterpillars. Okay, so what we want to do instead is create gardens under our trees. Okay, and then we can allow leaves to gather and stay in those beds. Okay, providing that protective cover for our caterpillars, and it will also add some rich organic matter to our garden. So who doesn't want that, right? So that's a soft landing, okay? Just to give you some tangible examples of some caterpillars that do that. I know we've all heard of the woolly bear caterpillars and hopefully have seen a bunch of them lately. Woolly bears and the caterpillars of the great spangled fritillary, they burrow under leaves for protection from cold and predators in the fall, okay? There are some butterflies like the red-banded hairstreak that actually lay their eggs on fallen oak leaves. Okay, and then some other species like luna moths and swallowtail butterflies disguise their chrysalis as dried leaves. Okay, so just some tangible examples of different caterpillars and how they use those fallen leaves to blend in, serve as cover, and then even lay their eggs on. Okay, so if we compare these two pictures, where do you think a caterpillar would rather pupate? Okay, the leftmost picture is the understory in the forest when I was out on a hike in the spring, and the right is my lawn with a maple tree, and all of its leaves are down, and I need to decide what I'm going to do for the season. Okay, so hopefully most of us are looking at the left picture and say, yeah, that would be great to have. Okay, but how do I do that in my yard? Okay, we create something like this. Okay, so we take a tree, we put a garden around it, and we plant mostly native plants. In this case, we have some tulips in there as well. This is at U of I, this is the Red Oak Rain Garden. And so this is a great example of a garden that is acting as a soft landing. So we're providing that safe space under our trees for those caterpillars to pupate and complete their life cycle. Okay, so one question that I hear often is, well, can I really plant underneath my trees without harming them? And the simple answer is yes. And we look to nature as an example, right? When you're out hiking in the woods, you see plants growing right up next to the trees. So it's fine for them to grow there. Planting, we have to be careful, right? When you're establishing your garden, we need to make sure you're not disturbing your tree roots. So the rule of thumb when you're initially starting planting is to stay a few feet out from the base of the tree, okay? But if you put your plants in and let them naturally spread and fill in, they'll take care of the work for you and then hug up to that tree, okay? Many of our native plants will move around a little bit when you plant them in your garden. They'll find that spot that they really like to be. Many of them spread slowly over time. That's just their natural growth pattern. So you can start with fewer plants than you think you're going to need and allow them to spread naturally, move around and establish themselves. Okay. Of course, if you want to dig carefully around your tree roots, shift if you find a root. We don't want to damage those. You should be good to go. So there are definitely many options of plants you can plant under your trees, even some trees like a black walnut that releases the juglone, creating like a toxic zone. There's even native plants and quite a big list of them that are resistant to that, and you could plant under those trees. And I have a resource I can share if that's your situation and you're trying to plant under a walnut. I can get that link to you. Okay, so if we move into choosing native plants and choosing the form of plant we want to buy, we have three main choices. Okay, we can plant bare roots, we can plant plugs or small pots of plants, and we can plant seeds. Okay, seeds are the least expensive and the least reliable way to start native plants. Many of the species we're going to talk about today are very difficult to start from seed, and it's not recommended. Many online native plant nurseries, if you do your research on those, a lot of them will say what the recommended method of planting that specific plant is. So for a lot of the ones that we'll talk about today, what I saw was starting from seed is not recommended, especially for beginners. So, and I've tried my hand at seed starting many times and had quite low success rate. So if you're like me and you're a beginner at that, it's a little bit more money, but it might be worth it to get some plants established to choose either bare roots or plugs. So here are some examples of bare roots. And if you're not familiar with that type of planting, it just means you're planting during plant dormancy. It's the same as planting your tulips and your daffodils and all of those that we're doing at this time of year as well. I think it's fun to get bare roots because you get to see the different root structures, right? We often don't see roots. In the pictures here in the top left, this was a wild ginger bare root. Here is that was a Solomon seal, and this was a trout lily. Okay, this was when I planted these in my garden last fall. If you're planting bare root, just remember to label your plants because you'll think that you'll remember where you planted them, but you probably will forget. That is usually my, my tendency. Okay, so we have bare roots, and we have plugs, okay? You can plant plugs or small pots of native plants in spring or fall. This is another garden that I have at my house that I just put in this fall. Hoping that those plants are able to establish before they go dormant and have a little bit easier time transitioning to their new home. Okay. So the next question is where can you find these native plants and when should you buy them? Okay. So if you're in Illinois, as I'm assuming most of us are, the Illinois Native Plant Society has a website, illinoisplants.org. And they have a couple listings there that you can search that has a list of local native plant nurseries, and not just in Illinois, but if you're on the edge of Illinois like I am, and it's easier to go to Kentucky or Missouri or maybe Indiana or Wisconsin to get your plants, they have those included as well. They also have listings of local farmers markets and plant sales that are upcoming. So definitely keep that in your back pocket as a resource if you want some new options of places to look. And I know there are many other local native plant sales that happen throughout the state as well. And then there's always online nurseries, especially if you're looking for something in particular. That's a great option as well. Personally, I've ordered from a couple different ones and had great experiences at all of the ones that I've used so far. One thing to note is the timing of your order though, okay? Many times, and myself included, we miss the spring order window because we think about planting in our gardens in like April and May. And in reality, we need to order these plants in January or February. Okay, so it requires a little bit of pre-planning because the plants sell out very, very quickly. So you might miss out on what you'd like to get. So even if you make your order very early, like for example, this past year, I made my native plant order in mid-January from an online nursery, and they will hold your plants until it's the right time based on your zip code for you to plant them, and then they'll ship them to you at that time. And they may even break up your order into a few different shipments so that the plants get to you on time. So you don't need to worry about ordering too early for you to get the plants. They'll work with you on that. Another hint is that a lot of them have a box where you can enter in your email address if a plant is out of stock, so you can get notified when it is back in stock. So if there's one plant in particular you're looking for, and I've done this before, and it's sold out, then they'll send you an email when it's back in stock and you have a chance of getting that plant. Okay, so those are just my tips and tricks on finding the plants that you want and ordering them. Okay, of course, we're talking about natives in shade gardens, but what does shade mean? It is actually a much more complicated question than you might think at first, but I really like this definition that I found from Kansas State Extension on defining four different levels of shade. And this is what we're going to use as we go through the plants today. We're going to differentiate between light, partial, full, and dense shade. We're actually not going to talk about dense shade today. But if we start with light, okay, light shade refers to an area that gets about 3 to 5 hours of direct sunlight during the summertime. Okay, partial shade is an area that gets 2 hours of direct sun or is shaded for more than half a day. Full shade talks about areas that receive less than 1 hour of direct sunlight. Okay, and then dense shade is areas that get no direct sunlight and very little indirect. Okay, so that would be potentially right next to a building, right under a shrub, underneath really dense evergreen trees. We're not going to talk about dense shade today. We're going to focus on light, partial, and full. Okay, I included symbols on the left side of the screen: 1 tree, 2 trees, 3 trees, and 4 trees. Those are the symbols that you're going to see on the screen with each plant as well, to talk about the different levels of shade that these plants can tolerate. Okay, so fewer trees means more sun and less shade. Okay, another thing to talk about is soil type and soil moisture. When we talk about soil type, of course, there's a range between clay, loam, and sand. And what you'll find is that almost all of the plants that are native for shade gardens will say that they prefer loamy soil. Okay, this doesn't mean they won't grow in clay or sandy soil. Some of them won't tolerate it. Others may still grow and just spread slower or not grow as tall or get as large. Okay. I will point out a few that can tolerate clay soil because that's typically a common question. My garden's full of clay soil, so if that is your situation, I understand your struggle. The other thing we're going to talk about here is soil moisture. Okay, we have a gradient from dry to wet. Most of the plants are going to fall right in the middle. Okay, we can call that music, medium, or moderate. Okay, and then of course we have intermediate moisture between our dry and our medium. We just call that dry medium, and our wet and medium. So wet medium. Okay. All right, so that's our background information that we have. We're going to move into looking at different plant profiles that we have for our native shade garden plants. Okay, and we're going to break it down into 3 different groups of plants. And I like to use these concepts of structural plants, seasonal plants, and ground cover plants. And this comes from a book that's called Planting in a PostWild World by Rayner and West. And I We'll put that information in the chat box at the end of the talk today, so you can look up that resource. Basically, that book talks about using native plants to create gardens that mimic what you would see in nature. Okay. And of course, when we are out in nature, we typically don't see plants that are spaced 5 feet apart, covered with the ground covered in mulch, right? Rather, we have structural plants that form the main shape of our landscape. That's our trees and our shrubs and our really large perennial wildflowers. We have ground cover plantings that are very important, but often overlooked. What is covering the ground, okay, that keeps it green? And that we can achieve through a combination of sedges, grasses, and ferns. And then finally, the part we typically focus on is the seasonal plants. So today we're going to focus on spring ephemerals and also some other wildflowers that can tolerate shade. So first, we're going to focus on structural plants. We're just going to look at 5, and we're going to assume that we already have the overstory shade trees in place in our garden. So whether it's a maple tree in your yard or an oak tree, perhaps a cultivar of a non-native tree, okay? We're not going to talk about adding trees into our landscape to create our shade garden. We're going to assume that that tree is there, and we're going to talk about other structural plants, including small trees that you could add into that shade garden, okay? So our first one is red bud. Red bud is a small tree that can grow between 12 and 30 feet tall. It tolerates part shade, okay, and prefers moist to medium loam to clay loam soil. So this one will do okay if you have some clay. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. It is a popular landscape tree because of those pink flowers in the spring that you'll find covering the branches before it leaves out. And then of course it produces heart-shaped leaves and bean seed pods because it is a legume. So it's a little different. We usually don't see that on a tree. It supports 22 different species of caterpillars, including the Io moth caterpillar, and it's also pollinated by bees. And I'm going to pause and just mention that the caterpillar numbers that I'm getting come from a website called Native Plant Finder. And at this website, you can enter in your zip code and it will tell you the number of different caterpillar species that can be found on different native plants in your area. Okay, so the numbers that I'm sharing today are taken from where I am, which is in Southern Illinois. Okay, so just as your reference point. Okay, so 22 different species of caterpillars will use redbud as a host plant. Okay, next up is flowering dogwood. This is another small flowering tree that can grow between 10 and 30 feet tall. Does well in part shade and even into full sun, okay, with the same soil conditions as our redbud. Its flowers are misleading because some of you may know the white part that looks like a petal is actually something called a bract, and that cluster in the center is actually made up of many small flowers clustered together, okay? But we'll just call it a flower in general. We'll keep it simple. Those white flowers, are in bloom before we have leaf out. So very, very striking plant again. And the green foliage is very attractive as well. And this is a good substitute if you have a calorie pear in your yard that you are considering cutting down. This is another tree that will have that beautiful full white look before it leaves out, okay? So I mentioned that because calorie pear is invasive. I cut mine down and you can too if that's something you're interested in doing and looking for a substitute. Okay, dogwoods support 102 species of caterpillars. Okay, so even though we'd consider putting this in our shade garden as an understory tree, it still is very, very beneficial when it comes to supporting caterpillars. And one in particular that it hosts is the hickory horned devil, which I've never seen one in person before, and I am very excited for the day when I hopefully do, because they look quite interesting. Okay, serviceberry is a shrub to a small tree that can grow 10 to 30 feet tall. It can tolerate either the wet or the drier side of medium soil moisture and does well in loamy, sandy, or rocky soil. So we have a little bit more options there. Does well in part shade to full sun. It's often a multi-stemmed tree, And again, it flowers before putting out those leaves with those beautiful white flowers. So it's another great substitute for calorie repair. It will support 91 different species of caterpillars, including the caterpillar of the red-spotted admiral. And it's also visited by bees and flies, and then its fruit is eaten by cedar waxwings, orioles, and then also some mammals. Okay, spice bush, if we go down to shrubs, okay, spice bush is a shrub that likes light to full shade, okay, and grows between 5 to 15 feet tall. Prefers more medium soil moisture and that loamy soil. Its leaves have a very pleasant odor for us, and that odor also has another benefit of making it something that deer don't really like to munch on. So we do say that this plant is deer resistant. I don't believe that any plant is fully animal resistant, but I think that that scent and that taste definitely acts as a deterrent to deer. Okay, so we'll put that symbol on this one. And it supports 10 species of caterpillars, including the spice bush, swallowtail caterpillar, of course, and the imperial moth caterpillar. All right, I think the last woody plant that we'll talk about is Winterberry Holly, also a shrub, but can grow 5 to 10 feet tall, and I saw up to even 20 feet. So depending on how you maintain it and prune it. Prefers part shade, but can do okay in full sun or full shade as well. Likes medium to the wetter soil and sandy or peaty soil. It will do really well in. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. It's a very popular landscape plant. One thing to keep in mind with this is it is dioecious, so that means we have separate male and female plants. So you need to have at least 2 shrubs to have the chance of getting berries. Okay, this holly will support 41 species of caterpillars, including a lot of our sphinx moth caterpillars, as well as polyphemus moth caterpillars. It's also pollinated by bees, and the berries will serve as a backup food reserve in the winter for birds, even though they're not necessarily their first choice. Okay, next we're going to shift to our seasonal plants. And these are the ones that we're often most excited about adding into our garden because they add all of those pops of color and the different seasonal interests throughout the growing season. So we're going to focus on a lot of spring ephemerals, as well as other wildflowers. And one thing to think about when you're choosing what plants to add is it may be tempting to plant a bunch of spring ephemerals, but the name ephemeral means that they're going to die back to the ground in the summertime. Okay, so if you just have a spring ephemeral garden and you don't have any other plants, it's going to look pretty sad in the summertime because everything will die back down to the ground. So we want to make sure we intersperse that with ground covers, maybe some shrubs and other wildflowers whose foliage lasts throughout the growing season. Okay. All right, so let's start with some ephemerals. Virginia bluebells is first, a stunning, stunning flower. It will spread to form colonies wherever you plant it over the years, and it prefers partial to full shade, but you can also find it in some sunnier areas as well. This plant likes medium to a bit wet, loamy soil, and the plants will get up to about 2 to 2.5 feet tall. Of course, with this one, the foliage will die back by the middle of summer. And the best way to plant and establish this one is to choose bare roots, and you can plant them in either the spring or in the fall. This one can do okay in clay, and it is noted as deer resistant by some online nurseries. If you have poor soils, that can reduce its ability to spread. So if you want it to stay more in place and you don't necessarily have the ideal soil, that could still be a good choice for you. And then, of course, we can see the shape of those flowers. We have those tubular purple flowers. That means that they're going to be pollinated by our long-tongued bees. All right, spring beauties are next. These are a really long-lasting spring ephemeral. So if you want something that's going to be blooming for a long time, spring beauties are a great choice. This year, I observed some blooming initially in March, I believe, and then 2 months later, they were still blooming into May. So they lasted a very long time. They prefer light to full shade, but I have them also growing in my lawn which is very common, and they're in full sun. So very easy to find a happy place for the spring beauties. They like a little bit wetter side of medium soil and loam, of course. But like I said, they're growing on their own in the middle of my lawn and many of my neighbors' lawns as well. They're very short plants. They grow only 3 to 6 inches tall, and the foliage will die back by the middle of summer. These you want to plant the bare root, and the best time to establish them is actually in the summer. So most of our plants we plant in the fall and the winter, fall and the spring, but some of them do best when they're planted in the summer, and spring beauties are one of them. Okay, these are also one of the first flowers to bloom in the spring, so they're a very important nectar source for our foraging insects, including a lot of our bees. Okay, next is Woodland Phlox. This is another spring ephemeral that will bloom for a long time, a month or two. They also spread over time, but not as quickly as some others. They prefer light to full shade and medium loamy soil. Typically, they'll stay under 2 feet tall, and the best way to plant them is with bare roots in spring or fall. Rabbits have been known to nibble these a bit, so if you have a lot of rabbits in your yard, you might not necessarily want to add this one in, or you may need to cage it to get it established. And the vegetation of these phloxes that don't have blooms on them will last throughout the whole growing season. Okay, so this is one that, depending on how mature the plant is, you may have the foliage stick around through the summer a little bit. Phlox supports 8 species of caterpillars, including a phlox flower moth caterpillar. And then, of course, it's pollinated by bees, bee flies, and butterflies. All right, we've got quite a few different purple spring ephemerals. Next up is Jacob's Ladder. This one can grow anywhere from full sun to full shade, so it's not picky about its light requirement. But it does prefer medium loamy soil. This one is relatively short, again, 6 to 18 inches tall, and you can plant either bare roots or plugs in either spring or fall. So we have a few more options in how we can plant Jacob's Ladder. This one is also deer resistant and not a really aggressive spreader because it's not going to spread through rhizomes. This one spreads through seed. So if you did want to control it, you could just cut off the seed heads at the end of its bloom time and prevent it from spreading, or collect the seeds and give them to a friend. Overall, it's a really beautiful, I think, underappreciated plant sometimes, Jacob's Ladder. All right, Bloodroot is one that hopefully many of us have heard of and seen before. This one, in contrast to some of the others we've talked about, is much more fleeting in its bloom time. It has a very short bloom window, and the flowers do not last very long at all. I often in the spring will miss seeing the bloodroot when I'm out hiking because it's just such a narrow window of time to see it. The flowers typically emerge with a small leaf wrapped around the stem below them, but after the flowers bloom, the leaf will continue to grow in size. So if it starts out, the size of a silver dollar, it will grow and grow and grow to be, the size of a 8 by 10 piece of paper. They can get really large. The first time I saw bloodroot leaves later in, May and into June, I couldn't believe that it was the same plant because the leaves were huge. So they will continue to grow. Bloodroot enjoys part to full shade and medium loamy soil. It's quite small in size, so 3 to 12 inches tall. Planting bare roots in spring or fall is the way to go. Again, this is another one noted to be deer resistant, and it does support only 1 species of caterpillar. Okay, so this is one of those that doesn't really do much in the way of serving as a host plant, but can provide that wonderful habitat under our trees. This is one in particular that's a great time to talk about its seed dispersal. So many spring ephemerals, bloodroot included, have their seeds dispersed by ants. And the reason they do this is because the seeds have an oil body attached to them called an eleizome, and I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. And that structure attracts ants who pick up the seed, carry it home. They then eat that oil body and dispose of the seed in their garbage pile. Okay. From that garbage pile grows our new bloodroot. Okay. And so that's not just bloodroot. There's many, many spring ephemerals that spread seeds by ants. This is also why if you plant these native plants in one spot in your garden, that's not necessarily where they're going to stay, because nature will run its course and the ants will move your seeds all around and spread those plants around your garden. Okay, next is, I put these two together, white and yellow trout lily, both spring ephemerals that over time will spread to form colonies in your garden. This one, of course, is the yellow trout lily pictured. Patience is required with these. They take a minimum of 7 years to mature enough to flower, okay? But the display is well worth the wait. So I planted one for the first time in my garden last year and it came up. So I've got 1 year in, so I need to wait at least 6 more years before I have the chance of seeing it flower. But I will try to be patient and wait for that time. They like light to partial shade and medium to medium wet soil. Very short, only about 6 inches tall, and do best when you plant bare roots in spring or fall. And they will die back by the middle of the summer. Okay, next is Celandine Poppy, another spring ephemeral that does well in partial to full shade. I do want to note that this plant can be confused for a different plant called greater celandine, which is an invasive species. So just note that these are 2 different things. Celandine Poppy is good, greater celandine is not desirable. We don't want to have that one. You can tell the difference by the size of the flowers. So Celandine Poppy, the one pictured, has large flowers, 1 to 2 inches, whereas greater celandine has flowers that are 3/4 of an inch or smaller. And we can also tell them apart by the hairiness of their seed capsules. So Celandine Poppy has hairy seed capsules, and the greater celandine has hairless seed capsules. So just want to note that because I've seen this plant misidentified before. So if we focus on this beautiful Celandine Poppy, which is one of my favorite plants of all time, it tolerates soil a bit on the dry or wet side of medium and loamy soil. Plants will grow about 1 foot tall and it will spread through reseeding through the garden. Planting bare roots in spring or fall is the best way to get this one established. Okay, and wild hyacinth is the last spring ephemeral we'll talk about. It does well in anywhere from full sun to part shade and prefers medium soils that can be acidic or have more clay in them. It will get about 2 feet tall and dies back in the summer. And it does best with summer or fall planting of the bulbs. So this is one that I did order from my own home garden and they shipped it to me. It was late summer. It was later in the summer than I was expecting it to. I want to say it came in late August. So borderline summer to fall, and then I got it planted. Okay. If we move on from spring ephemerals and we talk about wildflowers that we can find blooming in the woods in the shade, first up is blue cohosh. This one is another one that I added into my garden, and it prefers part to full shade and medium loamy soil, but it tolerates clay, grows 1 to 3 feet tall, and produces these really unique green flowers, which I personally think are really stunning. They're really different. And you can plant it in spring or fall using a bare root. And the flowers will be replaced with blueberries, and they're not edible. So something to think about with this plant is it is toxic, and also that makes it where it's deer resistant. So that's a bonus for us. And it does retain its foliage throughout the entire season. And it supports 2 different species of caterpillars. Okay, next is black cohosh. You may also have heard the name bugbane or black snake root in reference to this plant. They're all talking about the same plant. This one is rare in Illinois, but it's very popular in native plant nurseries. It can grow quite tall. So you could include it as more of a structural element in your garden as well, right? 3 to 7 feet tall. This one does okay in medium to loamy soil. And it can tolerate some drought periods, some drier periods as well. And it likes part sun to full shade. This one will also bloom. It's a longer bloomer, so it'll bloom for a few months between May and September. And you can plant it in the spring or fall with a bare root. And this one, just like our last one, has toxic foliage as well, making it unlikely to be eaten by deer. Okay, another one is red bainberry. And it's related to and similar in appearance to doll's eyes, if you're familiar with that plant. Again, this one's not super common in Illinois because northern Illinois is at the southern extent of its range, but you can find it in native plant nurseries. It produces white flowers that look very, very similar to the black cohosh, the ones we just looked at, but they are just held in small round clusters rather than that elongated spike. And then they're replaced by these clusters of red berries. Again, this plant, the whole plant is toxic to humans, including the berries, making it deer resistant. It prefers our light to partial shade, but can also do okay in full shade. And then moist to medium soil that is more acidic. And then as you can see, it does okay if you have sandier or more clay soils. For this one, you would plant the bare roots in the spring or the fall. Okay, Golden Alexander's is next. This is a great plant that does well, not only in full sun, but can tolerate shade. And it's also a good plant with the timing of its flowering, because it kind of serves as the bridge between our spring ephemerals and then more of our summer blooming wildflowers. And it will bloom for about 3 weeks as well, so it will last for a while. It isn't necessarily the longest lived perennial species, but it does reseed itself quite successfully. And it does well in either end of dry to wet medium soils, okay? Best planted as a plug. So this is one that we don't really necessarily put in as a bare root, but we want to get a plug or a potted plant of that and put it in either spring or fall. And then Golden Alexander supports 4 different species of caterpillars, including the black swallowtail. And there is also a heart-leaved Alexander's as well, which is another species that has a more heart-shaped leaf. That's another option for you. Okay, and I couldn't have a native plant webinar without talking about goldenrod. So I mentioned goldenrod is a full sun plant, but there are some species that grow in shade. Goldenrod has a really bad reputation, but it's not responsible for your allergies. And there are some smaller, more well-behaved species. So I know we've all seen fields full of goldenrod, and we know of species that are very aggressive and ones we don't want to put in our garden, but there are some more well-behaved, less aggressive species, and blue-stemmed goldenrod is one of them. Okay, this one has more arching stems and then clusters of flowers along the leaf axils. And then the stems, that name blue comes from the stem color, which can be bluish. They prefer part to full shade and medium or dry soil that can be loamy, clayey, or rocky. And it blooms in the fall, so August through October. This one does best planted as a potted plant or a plug in spring or fall. And it supports 112 species of caterpillars, okay, including one called the camouflage looper, which is hard to find, but fun when you do get to see it. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about are some ground cover plants. They're going to vary in height and include sedges, grasses, and ferns. And we're also going to throw in some wildflowers that can be planted mostly for their foliage with the added bonus of some flowers. And the first one we'll talk about is wild ginger, okay? So this is one we don't typically plant for the flowers, we plant for the foliage, okay? So it emerges in the spring, but its foliage remains throughout the growing season, prefers full shade, and likes medium loamy soil. And it does okay if the soil is a bit acidic as well. This one is a spreader and will form colonies, so it does really great as a ground cover. And then, of course, it produces a dark red flower that I think is stunning, but you have to search for it to find it. You'll usually find it under leaf cover at the base of the plant. This one has been noted to be deer resistant, and we'd want to plant it as a bare root in spring or fall. It does support one species of caterpillar, again, not really doing a lot of work as a host plant, but can provide that really important habitat. Okay, another plant is called pussy toes. This one, there's a few different species that are out there, and it's a really great ground cover option. This plant does well in full sun to part shade, and they're typically only a couple inches tall, and mostly grown for their leaves as a ground cover rather than for the flowers, although the flowers are quite delicate and they're just really cute. There's no other way to describe it. They just look like the paws of a cat, white little flowers. They also do well in poor soils and drier soils. So if that fits your soil characteristics of your garden, hopefully not too many of us, but I know I have some spots in my garden that these would do really well in. They are considered deer resistant and support 3 different species of caterpillars, including the American lady butterfly caterpillar. Okay. The next couple are wildflowers, and taller ground covers. So the first is Solomon seal, grows in any light from full sun to full shade, does well in medium soil, can also do okay on the drier side. While it prefers loamy soil, it can also perform well if you have a little bit poorer soil. Typically can grow up to 4 feet tall, but because it arches, you can see the growth form here. It's arched to the side. It typically only stands about 2 feet tall. It has flowers that dangle underneath the leaves and point them out here. They're not quite in bloom yet, but we can see them right here. So they kind of hide, and they're like a cream yellow in color. They're not very showy. And then the flowers will be replaced with berries later in the summer and fall, and the leaves turn golden in the fall, so add a different color element and fall interest in your garden. In comparison to Solomon seal, and I thought I had a close-up of the flowers. Here are the flowers in bloom. I added another picture in there. So in contrast, we have false Solomon seal, which is also known as Solomon's plume. The foliage looks very similar. The growth habit is very similar, except the flowers are not held under the leaves. They're held in a cluster at the tip of the plant. Okay, so that means that you'll also have a cluster of berries at the tip of the plant that replace those flowers. Okay, this one does well in medium to wet to dry soil. Does okay in sandy and rocky soils as well, and it will spread slowly through your garden. Okay. Remember, I said this one can also be called Solomon's plume, but don't confuse it with starry Solomon's plume, which is a really, really aggressive spreader. So just be careful if you're choosing this plant. Okay, let's talk about some ferns. Maidenhair fern is a great, Maidenhair fern and other ferns in general are a great alternative to hostas. This one has an interesting U-shaped arrangement of its fronds, and the stems are wiry black. So it's just really a different looking fern. Grows up to 2 feet tall and spreads slowly through rhizomes. You'd want to plant bare roots in the spring, and it's deer resistant. Okay. Christmas fern is next, another one of my favorites. It stays green year round. You can plant it in light to full shade, medium to medium dry soils. This one apparently doesn't do well in clay, although I did put it in my clay heavy garden and it seems to be pretty happy. And this one, again, deer resistant, and it does support 3 species of caterpillars. Okay. The last fern we'll talk about is sensitive fern. Sensitive fern is not called sensitive fern because it's particular about where it grows, but rather because it is sensitive to the first frost, and that's when its foliage will die back. It likes full sun to full shade, so not picky, and it is pretty happy with soil moisture as long as it doesn't encounter a long period of drought. And it will spread by rhizomes, and you can plant bare roots during the spring. Also deer resistant, supports 5 species of caterpillars. Okay, beet grass is the grass we'll talk about today. It's a good choice for a lower growing spreading grass. Does well in partial to full shade, medium wet to medium dry soil. This one will form clumps and spread through rhizomes. And the leaves and the seed heads do bend to the side. I don't have a great picture of that, but it's really a beautiful striking grass. And it is, again, deer resistant. And this is one that has been found to be resistant to the juglone produced by black walnut trees. So this is one you could safely plant under those. Has great fall color as well. Okay, and we're going to wrap it up by talking about a couple sedges. Sedges are a great option for a shade garden ground cover. And Pennsylvania sedge is one that in particular somewhat resembles a lawn grass. So it could be a substitute for lawn grass in a shady spot. Stays under 8 inches tall, does well in dry soil, and it will spread about 3 to 8 inches per year. So it will spread pretty rapidly to cover an area. This one's deer resistant, and you can plant a bare root or potted plants. Finally, Graze Sedge, also called Burr's Sedge. This one is taller, gets up to 3 feet tall, and it likes wetter soil. And it is also deer resistant, and it will tolerate clay soil as well. You can plant bare roots in spring or fall. All right, I talked a lot. I know I'm running out of time, so we're going to go through this design idea real quickly just to show you what I did. So that was a lot of information, and sometimes it's hard to pick and choose, well, what plants do I really want to add? So this was my shade garden that I started with. So last fall, I did some work on this garden. You can see I've got a lot of hostas. I've got some irises, a hydrangea, a viburnum. This was a beautiful garden when I moved in here, and I wasn't going to start from scratch. I wasn't going to dig everything out, so I just rearranged things. So essentially, I moved all the hostas to the back, and this front part here is where I was going to add in my native plants. Okay. You can see I've got pink flagging. This is where I had planted some of my bare roots and was able to keep track of them. But let's take this to a different look. Okay, let me get all these up here. So I highly recommend drawing out your garden and putting down on paper what you want to add. Okay, so I started with what I had in place. I had 2 trees that provided my shade. I had a whole bunch of hostas. And then, like I said, a few other plants that were in place. So what I did is I ordered some bare root plants last year and put them in last fall. So I put in a white trout lily, some wild ginger, some Solomon seal, and some blue cohosh. Okay, I also ordered my wild hyacinth that I talked about, and I planted that this summer when it came. I was able to pick up some Christmas ferns and add those in as well. And then, of course, things change. So in a bad storm, I lost about half of this, the tree that was on the right here. This branch over this part of the garden, which means that my shade changed. And I had a lot more sun in this area in the center of the garden. So I added in some prairie drop seed here. And it hasn't done as well as the ones I have in full sun, but I wanted to see if it would do okay in a lighter shade area. So we'll see how it does over time. And then the yellow, in the future, I'm going to add in a whole bunch of Celandine Poppy because it is one of my favorites. But if you compare this to when I gave this presentation in May, there are different plants on here because things change over time. I find things at plant sales that I want to add in. So don't be afraid to make changes, but this helps you visualize and lay out what you want to do. Sometimes you'll plant things and they don't do well. They might not come up. They might not survive a long time, trial and error. And so it will change over time. But this was kind of my starting point that I'm working from. So just wanted to share that with you. Okay, I've got a whole bunch of resources and I'm going to try to copy and put this in the chat. And I know that you received the Native Spring Ephemerals guide that I have on the top. It's a really great resource. I also wanted to share just suggestions of plants for clay soils, a planting under trees resource, and then a few books as well, including the one that I mentioned earlier. All right, that is all that I have for today. I'm going to pause now. And I recognize I'm 1 minute away from 8 o'clock. I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes to answer any questions if we have some in the chat. But thank you for having me on to speak with you all today.
Thank you, Erin. Oh my gosh, I loved how you worked in the shade plant benefits with what habitats they can support. And then you moved from the native shrubs to the seasonal plantings, ground covers, and then we got to see an actual design. And that was fantastic, kind of bringing it home. And back to the actual design, we did have someone in the chat box ask what what software to use for that. And while Erin's answering some of these questions, we have a few more questions, Erin, too, on top of that. I'm going to launch a poll. We do use that. Our program committee does use that to improve our programming throughout. We offer these monthly programs every month. So if everyone could just take a few minutes. But yeah, Erin, if you could back up a little bit, that latest question that came through the chat box was, let's see, what software do you use to design your gardens?
So I usually do it by hand. The one that you have there on the screen was really hard to create, actually. I just made that in PowerPoint with shapes and it was not easy. So I don't have suggestions for softwares, unfortunately. I do it on paper.
All right. Well, I think we'll send actually another question for you, Erin, that came through actually a couple of times. Can you share your presentation with us? There wasn't a lot coming through the chat box, and I think because people were trying to write down all these great tips and points that you were in plans that you were recommending. Would you mind sharing the presentation with us so that I could share it with those who registered?
Yeah, I can PDF it and send it to you for distribution.
Okay. Thank you, Erin. So when I send that follow-up email, then I think we've caught wind of a landscape design software program that you can purchase them, but I think we know of one that's free. So I will look into that. Getting lots of thank yous, Erin. Wonderful presentations. Let me go back to the chat box and see what I tracked here that was coming in. Oh, in discussing where to find the natives, one of our participants, Hannah, said that they work at the Douglas Hart Nature Center and they have a native plant sale in the spring. Coles County Soil and Water Conservation District and Grand Prairie Friends also have a native plant sale. Seed and bare root plants, they use Prairie Moon Nursery and Possibility Place. So, and I know those are all places that we've also ordered from with Champaign County Master Gardeners. So don't know if you have anything else to add onto that, Erin.
There's a bunch. There's more.
Yeah.
It seems like there's more and more every year, which is great to see. Mm-hmm. And I know if you are part of a group or an organization outside of Master Gardeners that is putting on a plant sale, you can send, I want to say there's a way to send that information to the Native Plant Society website also, where you can submit those so other people can hear about them as well. And we can keep that.
Great.
That resource up to date. So it's definitely like a work in progress. So if you're, like I said, involved in those, feel free to share that.
That's good to know.
I did see, I'm looking at the same time as you. The Caterpillar resource, because I saw that in there a couple times, it's called Native Plant Finder. And I will put that in the chat. If you search for that, it's with the National Wildlife Federation, and it's using Doug Tallamy's research and his colleagues' research on caterpillar host plants. And that's the one where you can enter in your zip code and then search for specific plants, or you can also search for specific butterfly and moth species. And it will tell you either the number of caterpillars and the top caterpillars found on that host plant, or the top plants that a specific insect will use as a host plant. So again, it's a work in progress and they're adding more to it as they do more research, but that has definitely changed the game for me. It is a ton of great information there.
For sure. All right. Excellent. Erin, I don't know, did you see there was a question also, are periwinkle and violets good to have under the trees?
So violets will do great. I am trying to I should probably leave them. I'm fighting the battle with violets. They're growing in the spot that I don't want them. I'm happy. I'm probably the opposite of a lot of you. I don't want them in my garden beds, but I want them in my lawn. I don't know, but but they will do fine. Yes. And they actually do support quite a few caterpillar species as well. The periwinkle, I can't speak to that one. I'm not really familiar with that one. So unfortunately,
Okay.
I can look more into it if you want, if you send me an email and I can get back to you.
Yeah.
When I'm thinking about it, that is not native. So I'm hesitant on recommending that one.
Yeah. Not sure if you saw Jean's message. Are the ephemerals the only plants that die back?
My inclination is to say yes. A lot of other plants will retain their foliage, unless they're eaten completely by some caterpillars. I know my swamp milkweed usually doesn't look like anything but a twig by the end of the season. So, but when it comes to dying back, no, it's the ephemerals that are the ones that are going to do that.
Okay. There was a comment early on. Cheryl commented that she read that red bud flowers are edible, as are the pods. Do you have any comment or knowledge onto that?
I do not. I have not heard that. So I can't speak to that. Now I'm going to have to go look it up because I'm curious.
And that's what we love to do at Extension, right? We love to research
Exactly.
and find out, what is science. So, well, Erin, you're getting a lot of thank yous for some great presentations. If you could send me the PDF copy of that, I will get that out to everybody. Yes, this presentation has been recorded, and once it's edited and closed captioned, we will make it available on our YouTube page at go.illinois.edu/ccmg YouTube. We did have another one come through, Erin, just now. Nancy asks, how do you keep plants from covering other plants?
So when it comes to just paying attention to the height, I'm assuming, of the different plants that you're putting in, and where you put them. Again, I talked about how a lot of them will move around. So you may have some that, find a spot and they're crowding out another plant, but then you may just have to move the one that's shaded underneath into a different spot. With me, I am a little bit more lenient, I guess, with how my plants behave, especially in my native gardens. And if they're moving around and finding the spot where they are, I'm happy to let them do that. So I'm sure you could cut back, right? And keep, if you have tall ones that are overshading others that you don't want them there, cut them back or move them around.
Mm-hmm. It is a good reminder though, right plant, right place, and keep in mind your design. Margaret just asked, what was the scientific name for spice bush?
Spice bush, I'll type it in. Lindera benzoin. Maybe I spelled it right. It's something close to that. Lindera benzoin.
All right, great. Well, nothing else coming in, Erin. I think that may be it. And well done. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being with us tonight, and everyone else as well. We all want to do our part we want to garden while doing what we can that's best for the environment. So this is fabulous information just as we're entering into the garden planning phase of, these winter months that we're going to be looking into this. So
exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I was happy to be here. If you do have other questions, my email's on the screen and we can include, it'll be included in the PDF that we send out. So feel free to reach out.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, Erin.
Thank you.
Goodbye.